Today we're talking about forgiveness, which is a very interesting topic. So it's really that kind of like means we are releasing ourselves from the emotions that keep us attached to a conflict. It's about being more focused on having good relationships than being right. You know that saying, do you want to be right or you want to be happy? It's a really interesting topic because whatever your personal view of conflict management is, it's always essential that you're willing to learn and apply conflict resolution strategies that will really help our interpersonal and professional relationships. So we all have experienced times when we feel really resistant to, resolving a conflict. Sometimes we want to resolve issues and have good relationships, but other times we want to dig our heels in and resist. Now, when we're faced with conflict, we may be able to apply skills that we have learned, but sometimes these skills seem irrelevant because you may or may not want to manage the conflict. You may not even want to communicate with the other person. And there are times when you may not be willing to resolve anything. So there are a few reasons why people do not resolve conflict. And they could be they're afraid. They kind of like feel like the other person is an enemy. Um, Sometimes even people enjoy the conflict as some sort of ongoing pastime. There might be a desire for revenge. There might be a need for an apology. There's like this consuming anger that they have, resentment and pride. Maybe it's out of principle, or because there is a sense of unfairness as well. So, but what are the effects of that? So while we continue to blame the other person, we keep distant, we're obviously unable to resolve anything, and potentially inflate the conflict. So as we cannot directly, influence others, uh, we really have to look at ourselves as a starting point. As the old saying goes, for things to change, I must change first. So some of the reasons we might be unwilling to look at ourselves and our part in the conflict, maybe because it does cause discomfort. There might be some feelings of guilt. And then we might not want to acknowledge something about ourselves. And we also might not be able to see how our contribution added to the conflict. So it always helps to identify the hook, which literally means the behavior or the event which, enrages us. The symptoms are our strong emotions, such as anger or hurt. And the projection is what we are aware of in ourselves that is causing us to react so strongly. So projection means that sometimes we're involved in a situation where we are so irritated by someone else's behavior that our reaction actually increases the conflict. We may notice how this particular person or behavior irritates us, but for some reason it does not irritate others. On the other hand, we may observe someone else getting upset by something that does not bother us. So some of the reasons why we react in such unique ways to different people and their behavior includes, for example, our values, our beliefs, maybe the information that we have about the situation, our upbringing, or our past experiences. So all of this information determines how we respond to something. These are the filters through which we interpret experiences, um, and our reaction to a situation, person, or behavior has as much to do with who we are as it does with the external situation. It's like looking through colored glasses. Everyone's view of the world is different, and we project our interpretation and feelings onto people and events. There could also be resentment. And resentment, I've talked about it previously. Um, and now we sort of talk about the ways resentment factors into our willingness to resolve a conflict. Resentment, interestingly, often arises from that projection that I just mentioned, or it may be linked to some unresolved past event or conflict. It's sometimes called frozen anger, and it can lead us to being stuck in a conflict, neither wanting to nor being able to resolve it. Sometimes we also hang on to feelings of resentment because initially they may actually protect us from being hurt or too much hurt, and they could give us a sense of self-righteousness, a feeling of superiority, and they keep the other person in an inferior position, or they're simply complex feelings, responses, and situations. So if we store that resentment, it means we are failing to forgive the other person. So when we have a high level of resentment, we also have a low level of acknowledgement. And when we raise our level of acknowledgement, we lessen our level of resentment. So when we are willing to acknowledge what we are feeling internally, it kind of means digging and exploring sort of the underlying issues under the surface, and bringing these issues to the surface and acknowledging them allows us to sort of get rid of the resentment. And acknowledgement kind of means thinking well of another person, appreciating their good intentions, recognizing their particular skills and qualities, and knowing that the perception held about that person, the interpretation and the how we feel about that person is colored by any existing conflict and discomfort between us, or between you and the person. So sometimes when we feel resentment towards someone, or when we feel deeply hurt, we need to go further than just acknowledging. We need a conscious act of forgiveness. Forgiveness really is letting go of anger against the other person and stop feeling the resentment toward that person. Also lifting potentially the barrier between us and that person, and being ready to start fresh with that person, maybe even trust them again. But it does take a substantial amount of emotional energy to do this, but it also takes a lot of emotional energy to maintain the resentment towards them, and literally almost punish ourselves through guilt. So forgiving ourselves and the other person is often a critical step in breaking this pattern, so that there's again old emotional tape that keeps playing all over again, over and over again, and it's a conscious decision to break that pattern. So the other person, might benefit from this because we have a better relationship with that person, and for us, we might benefit because it frees us to move forward from the past. And often we need to forgive ourselves to deal with whatever guilt we feel in relation to the other person. Yeah, I hope you found this helpful. Thank you for listening today.